Thank you, Mother.
I tried to read your paper, but it was very hard for me to understand.
Oh, it's quite straightforward, actually. It describes a new model of the universe that conceptualizes it as the surface of an n-dimensional superfluid.
Interesting. You can believe that, but God filling an ark with animals 2 by 2 is nonsense.
What did they feed the lions, Mother?
The floating bodies of drowned sinners.
Half of Americans who left their church no longer believe in God, leading a surge of nearly 1/4 of the nation who have no affiliation with any religion. 49% left their church in religion because they don't believe.
God literally doesn't give a what happens after you die. There is no God.
The goal of this secular revolution is to overthrow God and silence Christian America, for good.
You're not immortal. You're not eternal. There's no destiny, and there's no purpose beyond what you give it yourself.
So you guys are basically united by non-belief.
That's right.
Yeah. So do you non-gather and non-worship?
We tried, but
Not a lot to talk about.
yeah.
Hillary can bring us together as one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. What another amazing crowd. You guys are amazing. I want to thank Ann. I got friends here, Elaine, longtime friend right there. I have to tell you, there was a great introduction she gave me, but I have the best group of volunteers on the planet. These people are amazing. They're all around here. They're in the back room. They're running around with RDOF tags. Amazing people, so they need a hand as well. So tonight is a continuation of a new series of events that we're doing called Ready to Defend Our Faith, as you've seen. If you didn't see the first video, it is available tonight for free for you, as are all the other videos with that voucher that you have. So make sure you check that out. We're giving away a ton of stuff, as I told you, 100 DVDs and 20 t-shirts. That's what we do, all right? So in this series, what we do is we learn how to respond to a lot of these common claims that people hear on the internet and in the media. And we learn how to properly respond to them. You guys saw the intro, right? Sheldon Cooper, Big Bang Theory, ever heard of that, right? What is interesting and why his character is so close to home to me is that I grew up with a real Sheldon Cooper. My dad was a brilliant scientist, as many of you know. And it's interesting because they share a lot of the same characteristics. My dad had a PhD at a young age. In fact, my father, to brag a little bit, got a PhD in organic chemistry and a minor in physics, and he was in college for 5 years. All right, so growing up with a brilliant scientist, of course, has its perks. I won science fairs. I'm just telling you. It had nothing to do with the fact that when the other second graders showed up, with like silly light bulb experiments, I showed up with 3D projection viewers, all right? And growing up with a man like that, I remember the rich kids on the street, okay? You had these rich kids, and they had this really expensive racing go-kart. And they used to talk trash about it, and they'd brag. And so I talked to my dad. It's like, man, I'd like to get a go-kart. He said, well, we'll build one. But his idea was to build it out of scraps. Okay, so that's not what I was thinking. But okay, so he got very scientific about it. He designed these custom gear ratios and clutch assemblies, and it was a monstrosity. This thing was it had these huge wheels on the front, And my friends saw it, and they laughed, and that was until we raced. A motorcycle could not catch this go-kart. It was ridiculous. That was my father. He really did blow up a lab when he was younger. He really did. At the age of 15, he had the FBI visit him because he was doing chemical experiments in his shed in South Carolina, and he was ordering chemicals in the mail. This was my dad. He learned Greek and Hebrew just so he could understand the Bible a little bit. He was a true genius. He was a prolific writer. He was 100% scientist, and he was 100% believing Christian. It's possible. But unlike the character of Sheldon Cooper, my dad saw God in science. Whether it was quantum physics or chemistry, faith and science never conflicted in our home. In fact, they were synergistic. Werner Heisenberg, the creator of quantum mechanics, said this. He said, "The first gulp from the glass of the natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of that glass, God is waiting for you." My father lived at the bottom of that glass. But in the media, a different spirit permeates. That is the spirit that says scientific intellectualism belongs to those who do not believe in God, and non-scientific anti-intellectualism belongs to the believers. That is to say that the PhDs, the smart ones, they're the ones who don't believe. But as you've seen, the dumb Texas airhead Bible Belt mom is the one who does believe. And this spirit permeates through our media. You see it every day. And we have these evangelistic atheists now, so common on YouTube, that are teaching atheists how to argue with people like you. Here's an example. Check it out.
Oh man, I'll never change anybody's mind. They're so closed-minded, we never get anywhere. Absolute I want everybody in the room to raise your hands if you were once religious. I was. And I want you to leave your hand in the air if some argument, whether Richard Dawkins and the God delusion, or a friend of yours gave you some argument just at some point along the road that helped you to change your mind. Well, that's almost everybody.
This whole problem of people conflating religion and science and saying religion is compatible with science. And I'm going to come right out and be extremely arrogant and say, no, they're not. Religion and science are totally incompatible.
I wouldn't count creationists as scientists either, since they clearly don't understand how science works.
This is where God has left you, dear Christian. Within the ever-crumbling ruins of human ignorance, that is where God lies. That is the weapons he has given you to argue with people like me, when he could have given you every advantage in the world.
These are the modern evangelistic atheists. This is what our kids will face. This is what they face right now. And they say that religion is not compatible with science, that creationists do not understand how science really works. But when we hear the words of the most influential scientists in history, there's a conflict. Einstein himself said, "The more I study science, the more I believe in God." Sir Isaac Newton is widely regarded as the greatest scientific genius that has ever lived. He invented calculus. He discovered gravity. He discovered the universal laws of motion. He designed the modern telescope. He is responsible for the basis of much of science as it is today. But according to these atheists, he did not, quote, understand how science really works, because he said, God created everything by number, weight, and measure. In the absence of any other proof, the thumb alone would convince me of God's existence. Even Charles Darwin said the question of whether there exists a creator and ruler of the universe has been answered in the affirmative by some of the highest intellects that have ever existed. And the list goes on. Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics. Sir Joseph Thomson, the founder of atomic physics. Louis Pasteur, the founder of microbiology and immunology. Robert Boyle, the founder of modern chemistry. Werner Heisenberg, who created quantum mechanics. These are the rock stars of science, the intellectual titans. They're the ones who gave us modern science, and they were very explicit about their belief in God. And yet these atheists, like P.Z. Myers, tells them clearly, scientist, if you're not an atheist, you aren't doing science right. So apparently, these great scientists were not doing science right, because Myers insists that faith is mind rot. It's the poison that destroys critical thinking, undermines evidence, and leads people into lives dedicated to absurdity. Fellow atheist Jerry Coyne adds this: one cannot be coherently religious and scientific at the same time. So was the faith of these scientists mind rot? Did Newton, known as the greatest scientific mind that has ever lived, did he really not understand how science really works? To make these kind of bold claims, it would seem that these atheists must know something about physics and cosmology that Newton and Einstein missed. And apparently Werner Heisenberg was not coherently religious and scientific at the same time when he created quantum mechanics. And yet it is the work of these great scientists that is the bedrock of science as it is today. Well, many atheists will say, well, no, science has changed, that it is new evidence that supports their claims. Now remember this all night. Isaac Newton said, in the absence of any other evidence, the thumb alone would convince him of God's existence. So have thumbs changed? Has our knowledge of biology and physics and chemistry, has it shown that the faith of these great scientists was mind rot, that they were delusional? That's what we're going to look at tonight. But first, I want us to talk about how do we approach people like this, that talk like this to our kids and us. And I faced them. Here's the deal. No matter how angry they get, we approach them with gentleness and respect. That is the key. Remember who you represent. Do not engage in anger even if they do. And the easy way to do that is to ask questions instead of make statements. In the last event, we talked about using 3 questions. First of all, you ask, what do you mean by that? Make sure they understand their own question specifically. Number 2, you ask them, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Now you're asking them to provide evidence. Number 3, you ask, have you ever considered the following? That is when we present evidence. You see, many people assume that Christians wear the burden of proof. Not true. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. And remember this also. This will free you up. And some people are surprised by this, some Christians. You cannot scientifically prove that God exists. And as we will find out, they can't scientifically prove that he doesn't. And so it puts us all in the right perspective because it puts it all about the evidence. Now consider that P.Z. Myers says that he is an atheist because, quote, there is no God. Here is how he confirms his claims. Check this out.
You need the empirical evidence in order to confirm your interpretations of the world. You rely on the fact that you have to generate empirical evidence about the world around you in order to test them.
Empirical evidence. And yet he makes the claim, there is no God. So what does that do? The burden of proof is on him, correct? And by his definition, going into this, there must be empirical, we'll quote him, empirical, testable, scientific evidence to confirm that claim. You see, when someone makes a claim like this, we ask simply, how did you come to the conclusion? What is the empirical, scientific evidence that shows that? Now, most of the time, what you're going to find out is the conversation suddenly ends right there. Now, it's also important to understand this thing that we hear, and I was talking to Ken about this. When someone says that science disproves God, as we saw in our last event, science doesn't even work like that. Science doesn't even make statements like that. Check this out.
In past RDOF events, we've talked about the difference between actual scientific fact and personal opinion. So when we hear statements like this,
I am definitely an atheist. Why am I an atheist? Because there is no God.
We need to ask, is this science?
science has no opinion on the existence of God.
The University of California, Berkeley clearly states that science doesn't draw conclusions about supernatural explanations. So then what's this?
There is no God. There is no God.
Is this a statement of science or opinion?
Because there is no God.
If someone tells you that evidence shows that God does not exist, they are wrong. There is no such evidence.
People who tell you that science tells you there is no God, those people aren't telling you a scientific thing. They are saying metaphysical.
God did not create the universe.
Is this a statement of science?
The opinion of one scientist does not reflect the view of science as a whole.
We are also told that most scientists don't believe in God.
The more educated you are in science, the less likely you are to believe in anything supernatural.
Is that a fact? Well, consider that Pew Research showed that over half of scientists, 51%, believe in some form of deity or higher power.
This notion that if you're a scientist, you're an atheist, or if you're religious, you're not a scientist, that's just empirically false.
The conflict is not between science and belief in God. Otherwise, you'd expect all scientists to be atheists.
When a professor tells you that scientific evidence proves that God does not exist, they are wrong. There is no such evidence. And it doesn't matter how adamantly they claim it, how loudly they speak it, that statement is false. There is no such proof. So this would lead us to ask, what is the empirically tested evidence that shows that creationists clearly do not understand how science really works? Carl Sagan said an atheist is someone who is certain that God does not exist, someone who has compelling evidence against the existence of God. He says, I know of no such compelling evidence. So we have to understand atheism a little bit here. Many of these atheists will say that atheism is not a belief. Actually, atheism is predicated on two foundational beliefs. Number one, knowledge of the world only comes from empirical science through observation and testable experiments. Number two, only the natural and physical world exists. That's naturalism. These are two foundational beliefs of atheism. And so it allows us to ask something very simply. Just say, are you saying that the only way to know something for sure is through empirical science, through observation and testable experiments? Okay, if they say yes, then you ask. So then what is the empirical, testable, scientific experiment that proves that that statement is true? Better said, what is the empirical, testable, scientific experiment that demonstrated that the only way to know something for sure is through empirical, testable, scientific experiment? There's not one. There's no such experiment. In fact, the 2016 National Academy of Sciences said that science is not the only way of knowing and understanding. And so by that, it would seem that this worldview literally falls on the sword of its very foundation. Remember, this is their standard, that science is the only way to knowledge. This isn't ours. It's their standard. And if you believe that science is the only way to understanding knowledge, then you have tunnel vision to the human experience, because the physical sciences are completely lacking on the issues most important to human beings like you and me. That is, what does it mean to be human? Why are we here? What is valuable? What does it mean to love and to hate? What is trust? What do I do with guilt and grief and sorrow? What does it mean to succeed? What is meaning? Where do we get meaning? Why does Donald Trump insist on wearing his hair like that? These are the big questions that science cannot answer. And of course, the ultimate one, is there a God? You see, science has nothing real to say about really what matters most to humans. And of course it's valuable. I said my father was a scientist. I love science. And this culminates to the ultimate question, and that is, what is the empirical, testable, scientific experiment that demonstrates that atheism itself is true? And for that matter, what is the empirical, testable, scientific experiments that demonstrate that a creator is not a valid or better explanation for the complexity of life and the universe? But again, when we talk to people, we ask with respect. Now, many people will respond with insults. They will respond with logical fallacies. A common example is you tell someone that you believe that the universe has a creator, and they respond typically with, so you deny real scientific evidence? You creationists, you guys deny evidence. Okay, this is very common. Many of you have experienced it. But guess what? That's a logical fallacy. It is a logical fallacy. And a logical fallacy, if you didn't know, is an argument that simply does not hold to logic. This particular one is called the straw man fallacy for you philosophers, to misrepresent someone's argument just to make it easier to attack. My 6-year-old son does this. He is suddenly afraid to go upstairs by himself. And we tell him, it's okay to go upstairs by yourself. It's safe. Go on up, go. And he looks at me and says, you want me to go upstairs by myself? And I say, yeah, just go. And he goes, why do you want me to get killed by the creepy man? And I say, no, there's no creepy man. No, I don't want you to get killed by a creepy man. Why do you want me to get killed? No. That is the straw man fallacy. It's the same when an atheist equates belief in God with meaning that you have to deny scientific evidence. And then they attack you for denying the evidence. That doesn't hold true, and that is a straw man fallacy. And in real philosophy and debate, it negates the argument. And so what do you do when that happens to you? You simply respectfully ask, can you give evidence to support that belief in a creator means that you have to deny scientific evidence? Do you have any evidence for that claim? And you could say, well, these great scientists, Newton and Boyle, they believed in God. Are you saying that they denied scientific evidence? Okay, then what is the evidence to support that claim? Remember, evidence is neutral because it's all about the interpretation of the evidence. That's what this whole game is about. Another claim that you will hear, and that we hear all the time now, is that religion hinders scientific progress. Religion is bad for science. I've heard it so much. So what do we do with that? Can you tell me? Ask a question. First of all, which religion is bad for science? Now, if you're a Christian and they don't say Christianity, take them out to lunch. You're over. You don't need to talk. If they say Christianity is bad for science, then you ask the next question. How do you know Christianity is bad for science? Do you have evidence to back up that claim? Well, if it continues on, then you present your evidence. And actually, it turns out, research shows that modern science arose in one time and one place in history, 17th century Western Europe. And that is a period of time when the vast majority of scientists were Christians. That was called the Scientific Revolution. It was the most important time in scientific history. Sociologist of religion Rodney Stark showed that out of the 52 top contributors to the scientific revolution, only 2 were skeptics. Only 2 did not believe in a God. A common reply is, well, it's changed. It's all changed now. It's all different. Pew Research just showed that actually, in the last 70 years, religious beliefs among scientists hasn't changed much at all. Evidence. So now I want to talk about this new evidence that supposedly shows that these early scientists were delusional. New evidence. Remember again, Isaac Newton said, in the absence of any other evidence, the thumb alone would convince him of God's existence, all right? So I want to show you a video of a new atheist showing how this new evidence disproves a creator. And what he's doing here, I want to kind of set it up a little bit, is he is a lot of times Christians, and you may have used this before, they will use the comparison of the design of a computer to the design of a brain. This is pretty common, all right? So in this video, he is telling fellow atheists how to respond to Christians like you when you use this analogy. Check this out.
But computers don't build themselves, right? Even if your brains are just matter that can think, somewhere there has to be a God to build your brain, just like somewhere there has to be a programmer or a computer builder, whatever they call those people, to build computers. Well, it turns out no. The reason computers don't build themselves and paintings don't paint themselves is because they're not made of molecules that self-replicate. Human beings, animals, on the other hand, are. And when you have self-replicating molecules, you only need 3 forces in place for you to have improved functionality over time. Those are reproduction, mutation, and selection. And guess which? All 3 of which we have. Now, this is how, over time, evolution creates something like a brain or an eyeball without the need for a builder to do it. This is how, over time, evolution creates something like a brain or an eyeball without the need for a builder to do it.
Makes sense, huh? Makes sense to a lot of our kids. This is J.T. Eberhard. He is a prominent atheist right now. He runs Skepticon. He is part of the Secular Student Alliance that's in most colleges right now, that's very successful. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to address the arguments and the logic. I am not addressing a person. I want you to understand that, okay? If I met the person, if I met JT, I would love to hang out with him. I would buy him lunch. I'm just telling you. But what I'm going to do here is I'm addressing arguments and logic, not a person. So, we've talked about this. How do you respond to somebody that says something like this? There you go. Ask the question. So we're going to spot the claim, and we're going to ask the question. So let's see what he says and break it up a little bit. He says, with reproduction, mutation, and selection, quote, evolution will create brains and eyeballs without a creator. That's his quote. It will create brains and eyeballs without a creator. That is what? That is a claim. How do we respond to claims? Question. My man over here. So the question is, how did you come to the conclusion that evolution will create brains and eyeballs through these forces? How did you come to that conclusion? What is the empirical evidence? Okay? So what do we got to do? We got to do a little background. We got to learn a little bit of evidence. So he's given all the power to these self-replicating molecules. So let's talk about self-replicating molecules. Where do they come from? Self-replicating molecules actually supposedly, according to these guys, came from non-self-replicating molecules and then into life. This is called a process called abiogenesis. All right? So what's the empirical evidence to support abiogenesis? In our event, The Origin of Life, we addressed this. We heard from notable scientists from Harvard, Cambridge, and Scientific American saying abiogenesis is the weakest strut in the chassis of modern biology, that it's completely inconsistent with the laws of chemistry and physics, and the chances of it happening are so utterly minuscule that it's absurd. But the bigger problem, there is no evidence for it. In that event, we found out, an event called Science, Facts, and Faith, we found that if anyone could explain it, it would be this guy right here. Dr. James Tour. He's among the 50 most influential scientists in the world today. He's ranked one of the top 10 chemists in the past decade in the world. If anyone could explain how this could happen, it would be this guy. Check it out.
If anybody should be able to understand evolution, it is me. Because I make molecules for a living.
This is how, over time, evolution creates something like a brain or an eyeball. This is how, over time, evolution creates something like a brain or an eyeball.
We have no idea how the molecules that compose living systems could have been devised such that they would work in concert to fulfill biology's functions. Nobody has any idea on how this was done when using our commonly understood mechanisms of chemical science. Those that say that they understand are generally wholly uninformed regarding chemical synthesis. Those that say, oh, this is well worked out, they know nothing about chemical synthesis. Nothing.
Nothing.
This is how, over time, evolution creates something like a brain or an eyeball.
I've asked all of my colleagues, National Academy members, Nobel Prize winners. I sit with them in offices. Nobody understands this. So if your professors say it's all worked out, your teachers say it's all worked out, they don't know what they're talking about. It is not worked out. You cannot just refer this to somebody else. They don't know what they're talking about.
I will buy lunch for anyone that will sit with me and explain to me evolution, and I won't argue with you until I don't understand something. The Atheist Society contacted me. They said that they will buy the lunch, and they challenged the Atheist Society, go down to Houston, have lunch with this guy, and talk to him. Nobody's come.
Now, why do you think they haven't come? Exactly. You can't just wave around and throw around phrases like evolution did it to somebody like that. It isn't going to cut it. You can't just say, you know, selection and mutation, then you get brains. Not to that guy. You're going to need it a little bit better than that. You would have to back up that claim with real deep evidence from chemistry, from evidence in microbiology and genetics. You'd have to talk about things like horizontal gene transfer. That's what somebody like that is going to need. That's why nobody's visited him. That's the first problem. The second problem is even bigger, and that is these forces that he's saying supposedly pulled this off, all right? So he lists reproduction, mutation, and selection, okay? We all know reproduction. I hope everybody in here knows about reproduction. If you don't know that, you've got bigger problems. So we're going to talk about mutation and selection, all right? What is mutation? What is mutation? You guys going to know? It is an error. Mutation is an error. A mutation is an error in the gene, all right? If this error happens and it offers an advantage, then it gets selected by nature. That's what he's talking about here. Okay, so it's important to understand with this, and I'll try not to get too technical, is that in this process, nothing just kind of pops up overnight. You don't just get a brain overnight. It's a very gradual, step-by-step process. And it's important to understand in this process, each little mutation, each one has to offer an advantage in its current state. So if you want to evolve a brain or an eyeball, the finished brain and the finished eyeball must not just offer an advantage, but each molecular step leading to the brain and the eyeball, they must offer an advantage. If it takes 1 trillion mutations to create a brain, every step from 1 to 1 trillion must all offer an advantage. And when and only when they offer an advantage, then this one mutation, this error, gets selected. This is natural selection through mutation. This is what he's talking about. In our event, Evolution and God, we explain this by growing wings. Check it out.
So how does natural selection actually work? Any new trait, like legs or walking, starts at the genetic level. It begins with a mutation or a copying error. This mutation, which is almost always harmful, will appear in one individual, and it must be beneficial and offer some advantage in order to be spread through the generations, or in other words, selected. And as a result, all future generations have this mutation. To give you an example, say that in millions of years, if mankind is to survive, he must evolve wings. The process might look something like this. So let's look at how the process works. It must first start at the genetic level. One individual is born with a genetic mutation, which is the first evolutionary step in creating a wing. This mutation would perhaps cause a nub to grow on the spine. Now remember, each step must be beneficial and offer some advantage to this individual over others in order for it to be spread down through future generations. So having a nub must offer some advantage over not having a nub. Otherwise, this trait will not be selected. So let's say that having a nub does offer some advantage over not having a nub. Maybe chicks will dig guys with nubs over guys without them. And so it gets selected. And future generations with nubs survive, and the generations without nubs all die out. Hence, the nub is selected. So now we have a generation with nubs. Well, that's just one of many steps. Remember, this is not a wing, not half a wing or even a tenth of a wing. So we need the next step. Let's say another genetic mutation causes the nub to grow, and another genetic mutation causes them to grow larger and larger. But wait a minute. Every evolutionary step must be beneficial to the individual in order to be passed down the generations. Are these traits beneficial? Even though they may be intermediate steps towards becoming a wing, in their current state, they're nothing more than large, bulky appendages. So the fundamental question is, why are these intermediate stages even being selected at all? What advantage are they offering in their current state? This process does not know what a wing is. It does not know what flight is. And since it has no idea that it's becoming a wing, why does it transition into this and not this or this? And why is this any more beneficial than this? What drives it towards becoming a wing when it offers no advantage before it's a wing? And if natural selection did try all of these possible intermediary steps, we would expect to see fossils showing each of these failed transitional steps. There would be an abundance of failed wings. And more importantly, flying requires a lot more than just changes in the bones of an individual. It requires a lot more than wings. It requires sophisticated changes in the respiratory system, metabolism, the abdominal system, sophisticated changes in the pulmonary systems, muscular structure, bone density, the structure and origin of feathers, and much more. And all of these different sophisticated systems must be coordinated precisely for flight to even be possible. And yet we are told that natural selection does all of this from random, unguided mutations in the genes.
That's just a wing. That's not even close to the complexity of an eyeball or a brain. But it doesn't matter if we're talking about nubs evolving into wings or molecules to cells or organisms to you. They are saying that this is the process responsible for creating everything. You, your girlfriend, your emotions, that fight you had. This is the way everything was created. And that is random mutations or copying errors. But you see the problem from the video, right? See the problem? Kind of a glaring one. Even if these self-replicating molecules ever did mutate towards becoming an eye, how does a blind, undirected process ever know that it's making an eye without the forethought of sight? How do you go in that direction without a predetermined goal? How does it know its target? Dr. Tour addresses this.
To what do we target? So remember nature's problem here. You want to make a functional system. You don't know what to build to make it. You've never seen the target before. It is intellectually baffling as to how nature could have progressed toward complex functional systems over and over again from basic molecular structures when no basis for the collective function had pre-existed. And in nature, this has to be done correctly over and over again. The failed attempts are not innocuous.
It's a little technical, right? But, I mean, what do you expect from one of the top 10 chemists of the decade? I mean, come on. It's a little technical, but Isaac Newton saw this way back when. And he put it more simply. He said this, "Was the eye contrived without skill in optics, and the ear without knowledge of sounds? And these things being rightly dispatched, does it not appear from the phenomena that there is a being incorporeal, living, and intelligent?" It's easy just to say that molecules will mutate towards becoming an eye, and molecules will just mutate and become an eye. But what we find when we look for the evidence is that it doesn't exist, that there is no empirical evidence to back up that claim. But you know what? Let's make this simple on them. Forget eyes and nubs to wings. Forget brains. Let's talk about a simple protein. What are the chances that these forces that he's talking about, this atheist, what are the chances that these forces could create even just one single protein? What do you think? Let's check it out. Well, Charles Thaxton, some guys did this. Charles Thaxton, who is a professor of physical chemistry at Iowa State University, and along with this guy, Walter Bradley, who is a PhD at material science at UT. Got some friends over there. They calculated this. They said, based on the age of the Earth, the odds of getting one functional protein by this chance would be 1 chance in 10 to the 65th power. 65 zeros. If that's not enough, Hubert Yockey, who founded the field of information theory that applies to molecular biology, he calculated the odds of getting a single protein by chance in a prebiotic soup. He used cytochrome C. This is considered a model protein for molecular evolution. When he did it, he said it would take 10 to the 23 years at 1 chance per second to produce even one protein. Folks, based on the current age of the Earth, that is less than 1/1,000,000th of the time needed to produce even a single one of these proteins. That's a little bit technical, I know, for some of you. He sums it up with this statement. He says, the belief that any protein could appear by chance is based on faith. One protein. Not a brain, not an eye, one protein. Now, that's one protein. Consider now that there are around 100,000 different proteins in the average cell. Get your head around that. Now consider this. You have 94 million cells in your retina alone. Wrap that around your head. Now consider this. You have 86 billion brain cells. You do the math. We are told that an unguided process created eyeballs and brains with no forethought and no intelligence. That random mistakes, errors created the most complicated machine in the universe. That is your brain. Here's a video from our event, God, Mind, and Morality, about that brain. Check it out.
There are 100 billion neurons in the human brain. And each one of these is sending tens or hundreds of electrical pulses to thousands of other neurons every second of your life, second of your life, second of your life, second of your life, second of your life.
Every cell in its place. Every link between cells carefully organized. Nothing random. Nothing arbitrary.
It's almost overwhelming to think about the whole thing. If you think about how the whole brain and nervous system gets assembled, you just want to throw up your hands and say, it's way too complicated. We're never going to understand.
Consider the processing power of the human brain. Just 1% of 1 second's worth of human brain activity is the equivalent to the processing power of a supercomputer with 83,000 processors using 1 quadrillion bytes of memory. The equivalent of 250,000 standard PCs, the culmination of thousands of brilliant minds over the span of hundreds of years, with a cost over $1.25 billion and requiring enough electricity to power 10,000 homes. That's just 1% of 1 second's worth of human brain activity. Using only 25 watts of electricity, the human brain demonstrates maximum efficiency, magnificent design. It has the capacity to love, to behold beauty, to experience joy and happiness. And it has the power to even contemplate its own very existence. And so the question is, what is capable of creating the most complex machine in the universe? Random chance or an intelligent designer?
The brain is amazing. So even if, as atheists say, something as complex as a computer could come about randomly, I'm going to ask you, computer guys, what does a computer, even if it's physically sitting there, what does a computer need to function properly? Software. More specifically, it needs a computer language. It needs instructions, otherwise it's a pile of steel. Among the discoveries that have happened since these great scientists is one that changed our view of biology forever. Because scientists found hidden in the cells and the molecules of your body and my body was a language and information system so advanced that it far surpasses anything that we have ever created. DNA. DNA is the instructions for all of life. It makes you, you. You are made from instructions. And in DNA, as biochemist Michael Denton explains, they found artificial languages, decoding systems, and memory banks. They found information storage and retrieval systems, elegant control systems regulating the automated assembly of parts. They found error correction and fail-safe proofreading devices. They found assembly processes involving the principle of prefabrication and modular construction. And they say, a capacity not equaled in any of our most advanced machines, for it would be capable of replicating its entire structure within a matter of a few hours. Does that sound random? All this exists on the tip of your finger. And the information-bearing properties of DNA make computers look trivial. Researchers at Harvard and Johns Hopkins University showed that 1 gram of DNA holds 455 exabytes of information. That's equivalent to 600 billion CD-ROMs or 455 trillion books. But get this, 4 grams of DNA can hold all of the world's data. Guys, I'm talking about every book ever written, every Facebook post, every album ever recorded, everything on the internet, all the world's data in 4 grams of DNA. Richard Dawkins even said the genetic code is truly digital in exactly the same sense as computer codes. And he makes sure you know, he says this is not some vague analogy, it is the literal truth. Webster defines a code as a set of laws or regulations, a set of ideas or rules about how to behave, or a set of letters and numbers and symbols. Okay? So this makes the pertinent question this: how does random matter create laws, regulations, ideas, rules, letters, numbers, and symbols? We are told all the time from atheists that information can just randomly form from molecules. To understand the problem with this, we need to understand information. Check this out.
What is information? To understand what it is, let's look at Morse code. Here's a message in Morse code. This is information. But is it at all useful to anyone here? Well, let's translate it to Spanish.
Sacar la basura. Sacar la basura.
Now, is it of any use to anyone here? Maybe a few of you. Mind you, the information has not changed. only the means of communicating it.
Sacar la basura. Sacar la basura.
Now, let's translate it to Chinese.
倒垃圾。倒垃圾。
Does this help? It's still the same information, just another form of communicating it. Now let's translate it to English. It says, take out the trash. Finally, we can understand the information. It is instructions. Remember, throughout this whole process, the information never changed, only the means by which it was communicated. And now, the information is in your brain. And if we deleted this entire video, the information still exists, immaterial, intangible, and not bound to any physical thing. This means that information is separate from matter itself. The information is instructions for doing something. Those instructions exist independently of any language, any translation, or any medium used to convey it. It exists separately from the ink on the paper that it's written on. It exists separately from any screen pixel that displays it. It exists separately from any language or code that conveys it. And a code is not useful without pre-existing knowledge of that code. No language is of any use without pre-existing knowledge of the language. And so, if DNA language ever did randomly write itself, it would be worthless without first having pre-existing knowledge of the language. And DNA is like a written language. And we know that languages come from a mind.
So in order for information to be useful, you have to be able to read it. You have to have pre-existing knowledge of a pre-existing language. Information without these things is kind of like marriage without a spouse. Doesn't work. It's the same with DNA. DNA contains all the information instructions that make you and your dog and your thoughts and your emotions. And so when conversations come up about evolution, this is what needs to be explained. You see, ancient fossils and fragments don't offer anything to explain the vast complexity of life and biological information. And so what we'd ask is, what is the empirically verifiable experiment that shows a blind process like mutations and selection, taking a random molecule and then turning it into an advanced language, and then a way to read that language. And then from there, turning it into something like an immune system, or a clotting system, or a neurological system, or the pulmonary system, or the cardiovascular system, or the optical system, or the auditory system, or a brain function, or cognitive function, or logic, or consciousness, or self-awareness. What is the scientific experiment that demonstrated that that happened? Doesn't exist. And on the other side of it, where does the evidence point? The evidence for design in DNA is undeniable. It screams intelligence. In fact, it is so powerful that it is the reason Anthony Flew, the world's most notorious atheist, renounced his atheism. Even Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, found it impossible that DNA could have evolved naturally. In fact, he and other scientists, get this, like Carl Sagan, a Pulitzer Prize astrophysicist, Francis Crick, shown right here, the co-discoverer of DNA, Leslie Orgel, who's a PhD from Oxford, and Isif Shlavsky, who is a famous astrophysicist. They proposed that life on Earth may have been seeded by other civilizations. Where does the evidence point? Even world-famous atheist Richard Dawkins suggests this as a possibility. Check this out.
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means, to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto, perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer, of some sort of designer, of some sort of designer, of some sort of designer.
The signature of some sort of designer. So what is this saying? What is this saying? It's saying that the evidence makes a lot more sense if you invoke a creating intelligence. That is amazing. It is amazing because it screams that there is something else going on here, something much bigger than just materialism. And so when we talk about evolution, this is where you bring the conversation. How did you come to the conclusion? What is the empirical evidence? Do you understand? Am I talking to you guys? I want you to be able to grab this. Ask the questions. What is the evidence? You see, you can even ask it like this. You can say, how did you come to the conclusion? And I've done this. How did you come to the conclusion that it was not designed, even if it was by aliens? Because all you're trying to do is show that evidence shows for design. You see, when we are told that scientific evidence disproves God, it's kind of like being held up in a parking lot by someone pretending to hold a gun under their coat. And then you find out there's really nothing there. And by using questions, we illuminate the weakest part of their argument. That is the lack of evidence. And so, if these people are making claims without evidence, it's kind of like saying, well, we got, mutations and selections, so, yada, 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 we get brains and eyeballs. Or we got evolution and yada, 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 you had a cell and now you got a human. I call it the yada, yada explanation. Check it out.
Yada, 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 yada. Yada, 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 yada. I am loving this yada, yada thing. I can gloss over my whole life story. Yada, 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 yada. Yada, 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 yada. Yada, 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 yada. Yada, 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 yada.
Are you close with your parents?
Well, they gave birth to me and yada, yada. We bought the wedding invitations and yada, yada, yada. I'm still single.
So what's she doing now?
Yada.
Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada.
Yada, yada, yada.
Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada.
Yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada.
Enough! Enough! From now on, no more yada yadas. Just give me the full story.
From George Costanza, from now on, no more yada yadas. Just give me the full story. Don't accept the yada explanation. Ask questions. So now we have seen some of this new evidence. So let me ask you this. If these great scientists in history believed in God before this evidence, how do you suppose they would be affected after knowing this evidence? How do you think? Newton said the thumb alone, without any other evidence, the thumb alone would convince him of God's existence. And now we know that found in that thumb is a language and an information system that is far more advanced than anything we've ever created. Do you think he would say, oh man, he's right. The atheist is right. I've got mind rot. My faith is mind rot. I don't think so. So this brings up a question. Why do these atheists care? Why do they care? Why do they go so hard after Christians? Let's let them explain. Check it out.
First, this is the depressing part of the talk. Why do we even need to argue? So this is the depressing part. The 11-year-old girl on your left there is Madeline Newman. She's 11 years old. At one point, she turned purple. She collapsed to the floor of her house, and her parents didn't take her to the hospital. Why? It's an easy answer for anybody in this audience. They prayed, and prayed, and prayed, until ultimately she stopped breathing and they prayed their child to death. Madeline died of type 2 diabetes, a completely treatable illness. Parents who watch while their child dies are bad. You might even call them monsters. The problem's not, as Christians would have us believe, that there's something inherently malicious in the human condition. The problem is that they had a bad idea about how the universe worked.
A bad idea about how the universe works. So what's going on here? We're going to dissect this a little bit. He is using a very common thing, and unfortunately I've come across this so much. It's a very common example of how a mother and a father chose to pray for their daughter instead of seeking medical attention. And she did tragically die of type 2 diabetes. It was an awful story. And so what he is doing is he is using this as a basis to go after Christianity. So what is he doing? Let's kind of break it up. He is judging an entire belief system based on the specific act of an individual who believes it. Right? Unfortunately, this is another logical fallacy. It's called the association fallacy. It's an ad hominem. It's a fallacy which asserts that qualities of one thing are inherently qualities of another merely by an irrelevant association. Okay, so here he associates belief in God as denying medical attention, as if they go hand in hand. So that's the logical fallacy. Let's get out of philosophy now. Let's just talk real here. Anybody here a Christian? Okay, that's what I thought. Now, any of you Christians, you ever sought medical attention for your child or for your family? Interesting. See, this is the deal here. We start to smell a fallacy, you know. My wife is a Christian. She not only believes in medical attention, she is the medical attention. She's an RN, and she looks really cute in scrubs. If you believe, and if you judge any belief system based on the specific act of someone who believes it, all belief systems are in trouble. It would be like me using the atrocities committed by people like Jeffrey Dahmer, or Mao Zedong, or Mussolini as reasons to go after atheists, because these guys were atheists. In fact, Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer, said this. He said, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution as truth, that we all just came from slime. When we died, that was it. There was nothing. So if I use that as a reason to go after atheism, is that right? No, it's not. That's a logical fallacy. I would be committing that fallacy because it's not true that atheism is synonymous with the acts of these people. And the same holds true that Christianity is not synonymous with the acts of these parents. Here's another way to look at it. Consider the famous atheist scientist Stephen Hawking. Many people do not know that his wife was a devout Christian. He credits her with saving him from depression after he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. She prayed to God that he would live as he mocked her faith. Doctors said, when they said that there was nothing else they can do, they asked her for permission to turn off his life support. But she refused. At the bottom you can see, she says, my response was an instant, Stephen should live. So let's look at this now. If parents not seeking medical attention for their child is a reason to go after Christianity, shouldn't the story of Hawking's wife be a reason to not go after Christianity? If we're using that same logic? And ironically, because of the actions of Hawking's wife, he lived on to write one of the most important papers in science called Singularities of Gravitational Collapse in Cosmology, which is important because it gives strong evidence for a creator of the universe. So now, what other evidence do we have that has come around? What other new evidence would convince these scientists that they were delusional? In our event, God, Delusion, or Designer, we saw a discovery in science that literally defied comprehension. And that was the discovery that scientists found that the universe had hundreds of settings that were perfectly fine-tuned for life. And if you alter many of these settings by 1 part in a trillion, you and your pretty faces would not be here. Scientists with this could not deny the appearance of design, the appearance that the universe looked intentionally designed for human life. An example of this is dark energy, known as the cosmological constant. If you change this constant by even 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, you have no life. In the next video, you're going to see a famous theoretical physicist grapple with this. And watch as he sees the implications from this. And you're going to hear then the outlandish explanation that he is willing to believe to avoid a creator. Check it out.
One of the most basic facts about the universe is that it's big. So you might wonder, why is the universe big? There's actually a single number called the cosmological constant that plays a crucial role in determining what the universe looks like. In fact, around 10 years ago, astronomers discovered a really remarkable fact. The universe is getting bigger and bigger at a faster and faster rate. But this rate is 1,000,000 billion times slower than what we'd actually predict. When you're off by a factor of 1,000,000 billion, there's something very wrong with your understanding of basic physics. Even worse, this one number, the cosmological constant, needs to have this extremely precise value. And if the value is different even by a tiny bit, we would radically change what the world looks like around us.
If you saw a situation where if the parameter has a very dangerous value, you change it a little bit, the world would change radically and we'd be dead, we couldn't possibly live, that you would wonder where that came from. How is that possible? So just on the face of it, you would look at the situation and say, wow, someone really cared to put this parameter at just the right value so that we get to be here and that it's a pleasant universe and really cares a lot. If you believe that someone out there cares and twiddles the parameters so that you can exist, that puts our existence at the very core of reality. If you believe that our entire universe is a tiny little minuscule speck in a gigantic multiverse which is mostly lethal, that's a polar opposite philosophy for what the universe looks like. In fact, it's an idea that many physicists loathe because certain questions then become things that we will not hope to be able to understand.
This idea that the laws of physics are different in different parts of this multiverse, that what we measure in experiments are not deep mysteries of nature, but they're just random accidents in our universe. In a sense, it's the end of physics.
They say that instead of a creator of the universe, and this is the cutting edge science, there are instead an infinite number of universes, of parallel universes, where each and every possible scenario of any kind has been played out. In these universes, there are literally countless versions of you, countless versions of your dog, countless versions of your cat and this podium. Anything that you can possibly imagine has and will happen in one of these universes. And they say that then by chance, eventually our perfectly fine-tuned universe just appeared. It's called the multiverse, and this is the explanation. There is a universe where Donald Trump has a man bun. There's a universe where he's the Queen of England. There is a universe where Hillary is a Jewish priest named Ichtach. And there's one where Hillary and Donald Trump have a child. There's a universe where Barack Obama's the First Lady. There's a universe where Bill Maher is the Mad Hatter. And there's also a universe where Bill Maher is a pop star named Billy Gaga. And there is also a universe where I am an 80s TV star named Letitia. That they would have to resort to this kind of outlandish explanation that shows the power of that argument, of that argument, of that argument. So where does this leave us tonight? We have seen here that the appearance of design in the universe is undeniable to scientists. In fact, recently, Michio Kaku, who's a famous theoretical physicist, made headlines when he said, "I have concluded that we are in a world made by rules created by an intelligence." Folks, I can remember big atheist debates when he was on the atheist side. Recently, we see that history's greatest scientists believed in a creator. They believed in a creator. And now we have seen new evidence. We have seen the new evidence. And we realize that the evidence itself says something. This new evidence does not refute what these scientists believe, but it reinforces it. We have seen that history's greatest scientists, what they believe is validated. We've seen other scientists, like the co-discoverer of DNA, the world's leading atheist, be willing to accept intelligent design on their own terms. What does that say about where the evidence actually points? Now, For those who do not believe, the question becomes this: how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe it? How did you come to the conclusion that the universe itself was not created? What is the evidence for that claim? Where does the evidence point? How did you come to the conclusion that the beauty and the complexity of life was not designed? What's the evidence for that belief? Where does the evidence actually point? How did you come to the conclusion that an advanced language like DNA did not come from a mind? How did you come to that conclusion? What is the evidence, and where, honestly, does the evidence point? As believers in here tonight, we have been given powerful evidence so that we could discover it. But I do not believe that we have been given this evidence just so that we can argue with people, just so that we can be right. We've been given this to gently help people recognize the inconsistencies in their logic. And more importantly, to help them reconcile why they actually believe what they believe. Because that is the big question. Why do you believe what you believe? You guys are not put here. I am not put here just to prove to people that we're right. If that's all we do, then we accomplish nothing. Everyone in here, when you are talking to somebody, to an atheist, you are ambassadors of a God who wants a relationship with his creation. And when you're talking to somebody, that is the point. And they will see this God far less in our petty arguments and far more in our relationship, in our love and respect that we show them. Now, if you are here tonight and you do not believe, and I know there's some that are, and I am glad you're here, I'm going to talk to you for a second. Hear me out. I cannot prove to you that God exists through science. And now you know that you cannot prove that he doesn't exist, because evidence is neutral. So what do? We look at the evidence. And when we look at the evidence, if we are honest, when we look at the evidence, at the very least, it destroys any notion that there is some case or strong proof against the existence of a creator. Because that evidence does not exist. And this is what I want you to think about. If you believe despite that, why? Why do you believe that? That's the important question. If you believe without evidence, guess what? That's belief based on faith. And when we look at the evidence in DNA, when we look at the evidence in the fine-tuning of the universe, there is a realization that at the very least, there's something much, much bigger going on here than pure materialism. And if there is more than materialism going on, this changes everything. It changes everything about who you thought you were, why you're here. Werner Heisenberg said that the first gulp from the cup of the natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of that cup, God is waiting for you. We have sipped from that cup tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And what we have tasted not only destroys that there's any notion of that there is any proof against the existence of God, but it points towards him, because it points towards a creator of the universe. It points towards a brilliant architect for life and one who cares for his creation. A creator who sees his creation as significant. A creator who wants a relationship with his creation. And tonight I'm going to tell you, a creator who loves you and cares for you enough to give his very life for you. And this creator is pursuing you tonight by you being here. You are supposed to be here. He is here pursuing you with the evidence. So all I would ask of you, and I know a couple of you are looking at me now, and I'm not going to point anybody out. I'm so glad you're here. All I would ask is that you call out to him. In your disbelief, call out to him. Ask him to reveal himself to you. Ask him to give you new life. And if you want to talk to somebody, there's plenty of people around here. Anybody in an RDOF tag, with an RDOF tag, myself, we're here so that we can talk to you about this. I want to thank you guys for being here with me tonight. It has been my pleasure. I want to leave you with a very special video. Check this out.
My name is Aina. I'm a former atheist, and in fact I would actually refer to myself as an evangelistic atheist. My family, we had some really traumatic events between people with suicide and depression, and I guess it was at that point that I was like, there's no way there's a God up there, because he wouldn't allow this stuff to happen. From there, I moved into, I guess, atheism. I was just totally opposed to any idea that there was a God. It was, to me, just totally pointless. If someone shared their faith or with me or what they believed in, I would really take it upon myself to try completely talk them and logic and rationalize them out of that belief. Massive idols for me were Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. If you believed in God, probably the first thing I personally felt was just anger. And genuinely, I can't express, I think, harshly enough just how stupid I thought you were. When I would come at people with like evolution arguments and basic science, they just would have absolutely no answers for any of these things. Being a sports scientist, I was like, you guys, you just can't give me anything right now. Anything that could possibly move me in the way of believing that there's a God. They wouldn't be able to explain the process of evolution for me, so I'd be like, you can't even explain this, so why should I take what you're saying in these areas as true? You're just an idiot. I think what began to kind of open my mind up a little bit is when I met my now fiance, who was a Christian. Within the first week, she did bring me over to her parents, and they were all, her parents were Christians, her whole family were Christian, and I'm sure they knew I didn't have a relationship or didn't believe in God, but didn't make a difference to them. They just loved me, they embraced me, they were just amazing people, and I knew at that moment that what I believed about people who believed in God was wrong. I eventually decided to go to church with them. The speaker was one of the lead research scientists at Trinity College in Dublin, which is one of the most prestigious colleges in Europe. I just remember being so just perplexed by this idea that there's a scientist up there, and it doesn't inhibit him at all in his job. It was extremely confusing to me. It really made me think I need to understand what I actually personally believe. So I continued reading the Bible. I'm reading about Jesus. I'm not just getting a picture of what Jesus is from other people. I'm actually reading what it says about him. And I'm not saying at this point I believed in God or believed in any of the miracles or any of that, but what I could say was that this guy Jesus is a remarkable dude. And so I really was definitely, I guess for the first time, actually impressed with what I read in the Bible, as opposed to just angered and confused. And so the resurrection, even still, I was at a point where, okay, maybe, as opposed to no, let's just accept Jesus is outstanding. Going forward, like this whole confusion, and then it just got into the sense, am I just doing this because of my now fiance? And all these things would come into my head, and I didn't know where I was really with what I truly believed. So I started to do Christian things, talking a little bit differently, avoiding any sort of atheist because I just didn't have any answer for them. And I can't really say that this is so real. Like God, yeah, God is real. I couldn't, like, even though I made that commitment, it's like the more I read the Bible, the less I believed. I was like, surely that's backwards. I remember just sitting on my sofa and hurt, angry. And then I remember right in that moment, a voice came into my head as I was thinking about just how awful these things were, and I just couldn't do it, and all these things that I just couldn't believe. A voice just came into my mind and said to me, who are you proving yourself to? And it cut to the core of me, and I just broke down crying. Specifically for that moment, there is not one person alive that could tell me what happened there, that could rationally explain that in some scientific sense. And from that moment, I was like, this is real. This is amazing. This is, wow, God is actually good. I'm right now experiencing how awesome He is. And then all the Bible, everything, all the miracles, everything, it just made sense. Of course He could do that. He could change my life with a question. I remember that week being like, I need to get away. God, I want to get away and I want to get to know You better. I want to talk to You. So I went on a trip. I actually went to Port Aransas by myself, turned the phone off. I remember one particular night, I'd been asking God, show me these lies. Reveal these lies to me that I've been believing. And from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., I was writing on my iPad sporadically and not having a clue what I was writing until afterwards it was finished and I read it. Once again, I'm like, how can I explain this? If I say this to any of my atheist friends, they are going to think I've lost my mind. But it's the truth. I can't explain what happened. It was amazing. And so from this point on, having been in a kind of position where I was like, I would say I was a Christian, but if they were atheists, I'd probably just be like, to being in this position now where I'm like, this is the truth. I know this is for real. After He revealed Himself to me, I had this completely open mind to go back and say, okay, well, let's look at the evidence. I've experienced that this is the truth, so there has to be evidence for the truth. So I went back and did that, and that's why RDOF is so powerful, because it shows, and I guess if I could sum it up in a word, it humbled me. Incredibly humbling, because it really showed me how little I knew about what I believed as an atheist. So this is the first time really I'm actually looking and pursuing rationale and logic and truth from a perspective of theism. And with the likes of what I've experienced with RDOF, it's amazing. It's truly amazing that there is evidence there. If you come to one of these events and you're willing to talk with Christians and hear their point of view, I promise you are already more open-minded than I was. And that's encouraging for you. So I would continue to encourage you to keep seeking the truth. It even says in the Bible, if you seek the truth, you'll find the truth. If you're a Christian, don't be afraid of someone if they're an atheist. Love these people. Just because they don't believe what you believe, continue to be in relationship, be friends with these people. They are looking for answers, and the truth has the answers for them.